He thought her pregnancy cravings were a joke. Oysters and strawberry jam at 3 a.m. A sudden obsession with spicy Indian food. When she'd always hated it, he'd laughed, recorded her bizarre late-night kitchen raids, and shared them with their friends. It was all a hilarious part of their journey to parenthood. But the laughter died in his throat, replaced by a cold, sickening dread the moment the DNA test results flashed across the giant screen on live television. In front of millions, his perfect life wasn't just crumbling, it was being detonated. And the explosion revealed a secret so dark it would make him question everything he thought he knew about the woman sleeping in his bed. Mark Sterling adjusted his tie in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling windows of their downtown apartment. Below the city sprawled out like a glittering carpet, a testament to everything he had achieved. At 34, he was a senior partner at a prestigious architecture firm, the kind of man who didn't just climb the ladder, but built a new, more efficient one next to it. He had the sharp jawline, the effortlessly styled dark hair, and the six-figure watch that all screamed success. And he had Isabella. Isabella was by all accounts his greatest acquisition. She was the perfect counterpart to his ambition, a freelance art consultant with a serene smile, a gentle laugh, and a pedigree that traced back to old East Coast money. They'd met at a gallery, opening a cliché so perfect it felt scripted. He'd been captivated by her knowledge of postmodernism. She'd been charmed by his genuine, almost boyish enthusiasm for the clean lines of a Mies van der Rohe chair. Their life together was a carefully curated collection of beautiful moments, weekend trips to Napa charity galas, where they were always the most photographed couple, and quiet Sunday mornings spent with the New York Times and artisanal coffee. When Isabella announced she was pregnant, it felt like the final perfect piece slotting into place. Mark had been ecstatic. He'd imagined a son with his eyes and Isabella's artistic flair, or a daughter with her grace and his ambition. The Sterling legacy would continue housed in their meticulously designed, minimalist home, destined for the best schools, the best everything. The first few months of the pregnancy were idyllic. Isabella glowed. She continued her consulting work from her home office, her voice a soothing murmur on the phone as she advised wealthy clients on which abstract sculpture would best complement their multi-million-dollar penthouses. Mark doted on her, fetching her decaf lattes and rubbing her feet after a long day. They were the couple everyone wanted to be their future, as bright and promising as the city lights outside their window. The cravings started subtly. A sudden, intense desire for pickles, which was stereotypical enough for Mark to chuckle about. He'd dutifully go to the all-night deli and return with a jar, feeling like the perfect supportive husband. But then things started to get weird. It was a Tuesday night around 2 a.m. when he was jolted awake by a clattering sound from the kitchen. He found Isabella, her usually immaculate blonde hair in a messy bun, standing in the stark white light of the open refrigerator. She was dipping a raw oyster into a jar of strawberry jam. "Izzy, what in God's name are you doing?" he'd asked, a laugh bubbling in his chest. She'd looked at him, her blue eyes wide and serious. "I needed it," she'd whispered, as if confessing a deep, dark secret. She took a bite, and her face contorted in a mixture of disgust and profound satisfaction. "It's interesting." Mark had laughed until tears streamed down his face. He'd grabbed his phone, snapping a picture of his beautiful, sophisticated wife, looking like a goblin caught mid-feast. He posted it to their private friends group chat with the caption, "The Sterling heir demands tribute," and it's weird. The comments and laughing emojis poured in, and the incident became a running joke. But the cravings didn't stop there. They escalated in their strangeness. Isabella, who had always favored delicate French and Italian cuisine, suddenly developed an insatiable appetite for fiery, complex Indian food. She'd send Mark out in the middle of snowstorms for lamb vindaloo from a specific restaurant in a part of town she'd never once expressed interest in visiting. She, a woman who considered black pepper a bit much, was now dousing her food in hot sauce and demanding dishes with names Mark couldn't pronounce. "Seriously, Izzy, since when do you like this stuff?" he asked one evening, watching her devour a plate of chana masala with a fervor he hadn't seen since their honeymoon. "I don't know," she'd replied, her brow furrowed. "I just have to have it. It feels familiar." "Familiar, the most exotic thing you ate before this was a croissant," he'd teased, ruffling her hair. He found it all endlessly amusing, another funny anecdote to share at their next dinner party. It was all part of the magical, mysterious process of creating a life. Her body was doing strange things because it was busy building their child. It was simple. It was biology. He didn't give it a second thought. Their best friends, David and Chloe, were equally amused. David, a fellow partner at Mark's firm, would slap him on the back. "Dude, you're lucky. Chloe just made me eat dry crackers for 3 months straight. At least you're getting some adventure." Chloe would nod in agreement, sipping her wine. "Just wait until she starts nesting. I color-coded our entire library by the author's middle initial. It's a hormonal hurricane, Mark. Just ride the wave." And for a while, that's what he did. He was the good-natured, supportive husband, the hero of the late-night vindaloo runs the court jester in their perfect kingdom. He documented every bizarre craving, every hormonal swing, turning their pregnancy into a light-hearted sitcom for their social circle. He even started a mock-serious investigation, plotting Isabella's cravings on a map, joking that he could predict the baby's personality based on its culinary demands. Okay, so, with the oysters and jam, we're looking at a future surrealist painter. The vindaloo suggests a career as a Bollywood director. This kid is going to be eclectic. Isabella would laugh along, but sometimes in a quiet moment, Mark would catch a strange, faraway look in her eyes as she ate. A flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. It was a look of confusion, almost of recognition, as if the taste was triggering a memory that wasn't hers. But then she would blink, smile at him, and the moment would be gone, dismissed by Mark as just another pregnancy-induced quirk. The nursery was a study in tasteful neutrality, creams, soft grays, and handcrafted wooden animals from a boutique, say, in Vermont. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. The Sterling family was on track, proceeding exactly as Mark had designed it. The laughter was easy, the future was secure, and the strange symphony of cravings was just background music to their perfect life. He couldn't see the discordance in the notes, couldn't hear the creeping dissonance that was slowly, insidiously beginning to unravel the beautiful melody he had worked so hard to compose. He just kept laughing, oblivious to the fact that the joke was ultimately on him, and the punchline was going to be brutal. The amusement began to curdle around the 7-month mark. It was no longer just about the food. Other more unsettling oddities started to bleed into the pristine edges of their life. The laughter in Mark's throat began to feel tight-forced. The first real crack appeared on a cold January night. Mark was working late in his home office, finalizing a blueprint for a new museum extension. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of his computer and the distant wail of a siren. He was about to call it a night when he heard it, a soft, melodic sound drifting from the master bedroom. It was Isabella, humming a lullaby. He smiled to himself, his heart swelling with affection. She was already practicing for the baby. He stood up, stretching, and walked quietly to the bedroom door, wanting to surprise her. He pushed it open a crack and peeked inside. Isabella was asleep, lying on her side with a pillow tucked between her knees. The moonlight streaming through the window cast a silvery glow on her face, and she was humming a gentle, haunting tune that he had never heard before. But that wasn't what made the blood in his veins turn to ice. She was singing words, softly, almost inaudibly, but they were there. And they weren't in English. Mark leaned closer, straining to listen. The language was fluid, rhythmic, completely alien to him. It wasn't French or Spanish or any of the other languages he'd picked up snippets of during their European travels. This was something else entirely. He stood frozen in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, listening to his wife sing a foreign lullaby in her sleep. The next morning, he tried to bring it up casually over breakfast. "You were singing in your sleep last night," he said, pouring her a glass of orange juice. "It was beautiful." "What was it?" Isabella looked up from her yogurt, a puzzled expression on her face. "Singing, I don't remember that. Was I snoring again?" "No, you were definitely singing. It was a lullaby, I think, in a different language." She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Mark, you must have been dreaming. The only other language I know is high school French, and I can barely order a coffee. I was probably just mumbling." He wanted to believe her. It was the easier, more comfortable option. Chalk it up to a weird dream, a byproduct of his own stress. But the memory of the melody, the distinct cadence of the unknown words, was too vivid. He let it go, but the incident left a small hairline fracture in his certainty. A few weeks later, another deeper crack appeared. They were at a fundraising dinner for the Children's Health Foundation. Mark was in his element, networking, shaking hands, making the kind of connections that lubricated the wheels of his professional life. Isabella, radiant in a sapphire blue gown that accentuated her baby bump, was by his side, the perfect hostess and wife. He was deep in conversation with a potential client, a tech billionaire named Richard Chen, when Isabella, who had been quietly listening, suddenly interjected. Mr. Chen had been lamenting the difficulty of finding authentic, high-quality saffron for his wife, who was an avid cook. "You should try sourcing it from the Khorasan province in Iran," Isabella said, her voice clear and confident. "Specifically, from the farms around the city of Mashhad. The corms there produce filaments with a deeper color and a more intense aroma. Most commercial saffron is just not comparable." The table went silent. Mr. Chen stared at Isabella, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Mark looked at his wife, baffled. He had never heard her mention Iran, let alone the specifics of its saffron cultivation. Isabella's geographical knowledge was usually limited to the world's major art capitals. "That's remarkably specific, Mrs. Sterling," Mr. Chen said, clearly impressed. "My wife's family is from Tehran." "You are absolutely correct. The saffron from Mashhad is considered the best in the world. How did you come by that information?" Isabella's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A familiar look of confusion flickered in her eyes. "Oh," she said, touching her temple lightly. I must have read it in an article somewhere, for a client. You know, researching global art and antiquities, you pick up all sorts of trivia." She recovered gracefully, steering the conversation back to art, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling of profound unease. It wasn't just trivia, it was deep, esoteric knowledge delivered with the casual authority of an expert. He watched her for the rest of the evening, noticing things he'd previously ignored, the way she pronounced certain words with a slight, almost imperceptible lilt he'd never registered before. The way her gaze would sometimes drift as if she were seeing something far beyond the gilded ballroom. The whispers of doubt, once a faint hum in the back of his mind, were growing into a discernible murmur. He started paying closer attention, his light-hearted amusement replaced by a kind of forensic observation. He noticed that the Indian food she craved wasn't just any Indian food. It had to be from a small, family-run place called Mumbai Masala over on Lexington Avenue. He went there himself one afternoon, and the owner, a friendly man named Mr. Khan, greeted him warmly. "Ah, you are back for your wife. She loves my mother's recipes. She says they taste like home." "Home?" Mark asked, his grip tightening on the takeout bag. "She's from Connecticut." Mr. Khan just smiled. "A taste can be a powerful thing, sir. It can take you anywhere." Mark left the restaurant feeling more confused than ever. The doubt began to poison his interactions with his best friend David. Over their weekly squash game, Mark found himself unable to maintain the usual banter. "What's eating you, man?" David asked, toweling off after a particularly brutal rally. "You're off your game. Trouble in paradise." Mark hesitated, then decided to confide in him. He told him about the sleep singing, the saffron comment, the strange obsession with one particular restaurant. He expected David to laugh it off, to tell him he was being paranoid. But David just listened, his expression growing more serious. "That's weird, man," he said finally. "Like really weird. Not just pickles and ice cream weird." "Right," Mark said, relieved that someone else saw it. "I feel like I'm going crazy. I look at her, and she's the same Izzy I've always known, but then these things happen, and it's like there's a stranger living inside her." "Have you thought about where she was maybe 9 months before she got pregnant?" David asked delicately. The question hung in the air between them, ugly and unavoidable. Mark felt a surge of anger. "What are you suggesting? That she cheated? No way. We were together that whole month. She had a consulting trip to Chicago for a few days, but that's it. We talked every night. There's no way." Okay, man, easy," David said, holding up his hands. "Just throwing stuff out there. But you have to admit, it's a lot of strange coincidences, all pointing in a non-Western direction. The language, the food, the saffron. It doesn't sound like it's coming from a girl from Greenwich, Connecticut." Mark wanted to punch him. He wanted to defend Isabella's honor, to scream that their love was perfect and unassailable. But he couldn't. The doubt was a corrosive acid, eating away at the foundations of his certainty. He remembered her trip to Chicago. She'd been there for a major art fair. Had she been alone the whole time? He had trusted her implicitly. He still wanted to. He went home that night and found Isabella in the nursery, carefully folding tiny onesies and placing them in a drawer. She looked up at him and smiled, her face aglow with maternal love. "Look," she said, holding up a tiny pair of socks. "Aren't they the sweetest thing?" In that moment, she was his Isabella. Beautiful, loving, the mother of his child. The doubts felt like a betrayal, a sickness in his own mind. He pushed them down, locked them away. He hugged his wife, inhaled the familiar scent of her perfume, and told himself that David was wrong, that it was all just a hormonal hurricane, and that he just needed to ride the wave. But that night, as he lay in the dark, he heard it again. The soft, melodic humming from the woman beside him. He didn't get up this time. He just lay there, eyes wide open in the darkness, listening to the alien lullaby and feeling the cracks in his perfect world spiderwebbing out of control, threatening to shatter everything he held dear. The canvas of their life was no longer pristine. It was marred by questions he was becoming increasingly terrified to ask. The email arrived on a crisp March morning, addressed to both him and Isabella. It was from a television producer. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," it began, the tone sickeningly cheerful. "My name is Janice Riley, and I'm the executive producer of the hit reality series Baby Steps. We follow couples on their journey through the final exciting weeks of pregnancy, celebrating the joys, the anxieties, and the beautiful moment of welcoming a new life. A mutual acquaintance, Chloe Bishop, recommended you as a truly wonderful and inspiring couple. We believe your story would be a perfect fit for our show." Mark's immediate reaction was a visceral no. The thought of inviting cameras into their home, into the most intimate moments of their lives, felt like a violation. Their life was curated for a reason. It was meant to be viewed from a distance, like a painting in a gallery, not poured at by millions of strangers. Especially not now, with the foundation of that life feeling so unstable. He was about to delete the email when Isabella leaned over his shoulder, her chin resting on his arm. "Oh, Baby Steps, Chloe watches that religiously. She says it's really sweet. It's reality TV, Izzy. It's the opposite of reality," he said dismissively. "They'll manufacture drama, edit us into caricatures. No, thank you." But Isabella's eyes were shining with an idea. "Mark, wait. Maybe this could be a good thing." "A good thing?" How she turned to face him, her expression earnest, almost pleading. "Don't think I haven't noticed how you've been looking at me lately. The questions you're not asking. I see the doubt in your eyes, Mark. I know you think something is off." He couldn't meet her gaze. The guilt was a physical weight in his chest. "I don't know why I'm craving this food, or why I know things I shouldn't," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "It scares me too. I lie awake at night, wondering if I'm losing my mind. But I know one thing with every fiber of my being. This baby is yours. This is our baby." She took a deep breath. The show, Mark. The finale. They do a live DNA test reveal right on the air. A paternity promise segment, Chloe called it, to prove the strength of the family bond. Mark felt a jolt, a mixture of horror and a strange, desperate hope. A DNA test. A definitive scientific answer that would either obliterate his fears or confirm his worst nightmares. "We can do it," Isabella insisted, her grip on his arm tightening. "We can go on this show, and in front of everyone we can prove that all these weird things, they're just that, weird. We can show them what a strong, loving family we are. We can silence all the doubts, your doubts." It was a gamble of terrifying proportions. If she was right, it would be the ultimate vindication. Their love story, broadcast for all to see, culminating in scientific proof of their bond. It would erase the sleep singing, the saffron, the whispers from his own mind. It would make them stronger than ever. But if she was wrong, the thought was a black hole, threatening to swallow him whole. To have that revealed on live television, the humiliation, the destruction. It would be a public execution of his life, his marriage, his future. "Izzy, I don't know," he stammered. "It's too much of a risk. The only risk is letting this suspicion grow between us until it poisons everything," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I can't live like that, Mark, and I won't let our child be born into a house filled with unspoken questions. Please, let's do this. Let's get our happy ending." He looked at his wife, at the tears streaming down her beautiful face, at her unwavering conviction. How could he deny her this? How could he admit that his own faith in her was so fragile that he was afraid of a simple test? Maybe she was right. Maybe this was the only way to lance the boil of his suspicion before it became septic. He was a man who took calculated risks in business all the time. This was just the biggest risk of his life. Against his better judgment, against every screaming instinct in his body, he heard himself say, "Okay, let's do it." The next few weeks were a surreal blur. The Baby Steps crew descended upon their apartment like a friendly camera-wielding army. Their minimalist sanctuary was suddenly cluttered with lighting rigs, sound booms, and black-clad technicians who moved with a quiet, unnerving efficiency. Janice Riley, the producer, was a whirlwind of fake smiles and probing questions, disguised as casual conversation. "So, Mark, tell us about these cravings. So funny, so quirky. It shows what a fun, spontaneous couple you are," she'd say, while the camera zoomed in on his face, searching for any flicker of conflict. They filmed everything. Them assembling the crib, Isabella wincing as Mark fumbled with the instructions. Them attending a birthing class, Mark's discomfort with the graphic videos played for laughs. They even followed him on a late-night run for lamb vindaloo, framing it as a heroic quest of a devoted husband. Mark felt like an actor in a play about his own life. He smiled when he was supposed to smile, delivered the lines he knew they wanted to hear about how excited and in love he was. He and Isabella presented a united perfect front for the cameras. But behind the scenes, the tension was suffocating. They barely spoke when the crew wasn't there. The unspoken truth of why they were doing this hanging between them like a shroud. The day they collected the DNA samples was the worst. A friendly nurse arrived part of the paternity promise team. She took a simple cheek swab from Mark and then one from Isabella. Then she drew a vial of blood from Isabella's arm for the non-invasive prenatal paternity test. "We just need a few cells from the baby which are floating around in Mom's bloodstream," she explained cheerfully. "Science is amazing, isn't it?" Mark watched the needles slide into his wife's vein, and he felt a wave of nausea. This was it, the point of no return. The evidence was collected, sealed in a biohazard bag, and sent off to a lab. The results would be delivered in a sealed envelope to the host of the show to be opened live on the finale in 2 weeks. In the moments they had to themselves, Mark found himself scrutinizing Isabella, searching for any sign of deception, a flicker of fear, a moment of guilt. But he found nothing. Her belief in the outcome was absolute. Her serenity, which had once calmed him, now felt like a form of madness. How could she be so certain? Did she have a secret he couldn't even begin to fathom the night before the live finale? He couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, looking down at the sleeping city. He had gambled everything, his reputation, his marriage, his sanity, on a single roll of the genetic dice. He felt a profound sense of loneliness, a feeling that he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and his wife, the person he should have been able to trust implicitly, was the one who had led him there. He turned to look at her, asleep in their bed, her belly a perfect round dome under the sheets. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. He felt a surge of love for her, so intense it was painful. Please, he prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. Please let me be wrong. Please let this all be a terrible, paranoid dream. But as he stood there watching her, she stirred in her sleep. A soft sound escaped her lips, and in the dead silence of the night, he heard it again, clear as a bell. The lullaby, the strange foreign words. It wasn't a dream, it was real. And in his heart, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, he knew that the gamble wasn't going to pay off. The house of cards they had built for the cameras and for themselves was about to come crashing down. The television studio was a cavern of organized chaos. It was cold, bathed in an aggressive artificial blue light that made everyone look slightly ill. A live audience hyped up by a warm-up comedian buzzed with anticipation on tiered seating that rose into the darkness. Mark felt Isabella's hand in his. It was clammy and cold. He squeezed it, a gesture that the cameras would interpret as loving support, but was in reality a desperate attempt to anchor himself to something solid as the world tilted beneath his feet. They were seated on a plush white sofa facing the show's host, a man named Derek Vance. Derek had impossibly white teeth and the kind of practiced sincerity that set Mark's teeth on edge. He was the master of ceremonies for this public vivisection. "Welcome back to the Baby Steps live finale," Derek boomed, his voice echoing through the studio. The audience applauded on cue. "We've laughed and cried with our amazing couples all season long, and tonight we are here with the wonderful Mark and Isabella Sterling, the giant screen behind them," which had been showing a montage of their journey, Mark's comical attempts at baby-proofing Isabella's quirky cravings, them painting the nursery in soft, gender-neutral tones, switched to a live feed of their faces. Mark could see himself, his smile a tight, unnatural rictus. Isabella beside him looked radiant, but fragile, like a porcelain doll on the verge of cracking. "Now, Mark, Isabella, Derek," said, leaning forward conspiratorially, "you two have been such an inspiration, a true modern love story. But you decided to do something very special for our finale, our paternity promise segment. Tell us why." This was Isabella's cue. She had rehearsed this. "Well, Derek," she began, her voice steady, though Mark could see a slight tremor in her hands. "Pregnancy is a whirlwind of hormones and emotions. We've had so much fun with my unusual cravings." She laughed lightly, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But we wanted to end our journey on a note of absolute certainty and love. We wanted to share with the world and with our future child a testament to our bond. This isn't about doubt, it's about celebration." It was a brilliant performance. Mark played his part, nodding in solemn agreement. "Exactly. It's a promise to our baby, a promise of a stable, loving family. Forever." The audience cooed. Derek placed a hand over his heart. "Beautiful, just beautiful. And that promise, that scientific proof, is right here." A production assistant, a young woman with a headset and a clipboard, walked on stage and handed Derek a large, sealed manila envelope. The camera zoomed in on it, the words "Sterling Family, Paternity Promise Results, Confidential," stamped on the front in bold red letters. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was it, the moment of truth or the moment of annihilation. He chanced a glance at Isabella. She was staring at the envelope, her face pale, but her expression still one of serene confidence. He felt a flicker of hope. Could he have been wrong? Could this all have been a monstrous creation of his own anxiety? "All right," Derek said, tearing open the envelope with dramatic flair. "The lab technicians have compared the baby's DNA profile obtained from the prenatal test with the DNA samples provided by Mark and Isabella." He pulled out a single sheet of paper. He scanned it, his professional smile momentarily faltering. It was just for a second a micro-expression of confusion, but Mark saw it. And in that split second, his fragile hope shattered into a million pieces. Derek recovered quickly, his host's mask slipping back into place. But something had shifted. The air was thick with a new, dangerous energy. "Okay, let's see what we have here," Derek said, his voice a little too bright. As expected, the results confirm that Isabella Sterling is with 99.99% certainty the biological mother. A smattering of polite applause. Derek held up a hand. No surprise there, of course, but now, for the big reveal, the moment of paternity promise. He paused, letting the silence stretch, milking the drama. Mark felt like he was going to vomit. He could feel the heat of the studio lights, the weight of millions of eyes watching him. The results show. Derek began, his eyes flicking from the paper to Mark's face, a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like pity in them. That the paternal DNA markers do not match. Mark Sterling is not the biological father. Silence. A profound, absolute silence fell over the studio. The buzzing of the audience, the hum of the equipment, everything ceased. It was as if the world had stopped breathing. Then, a single gasp from someone in the audience, sharp and loud in the stillness. Mark didn't feel anything at first. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds disconnected from meaning. He stared at Derek, then at the giant screen, showing his own face, slack-jawed and pale. And then he looked at Isabella. The serene confidence was gone. Her face had crumpled, the color, draining from it completely. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. Her eyes, wide with pure, unadulterated shock, were locked on the paper in Derek's hand. It wasn't the look of someone whose lie had been exposed. It was the look of someone whose entire reality had just been ripped apart. She was just as stunned as he was. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "No, that's not possible. That's a mistake. Run it again." "It's a mistake." Her voice started to rise, cracking with hysteria. The cameras, merciless, zoomed in on her face, then on Mark's. The public spectacle of their perfect life had just become a public execution, and the blood was everywhere. Derek, for the first time, looked genuinely flustered. This was not the heartwarming, celebratory television he had promised. This was a train wreck happening in real time. Now, Isabella the lab is state-of-the-art. The results are triple-checked for accuracy. "It's a mistake," she shrieked, her hands flying to her stomach, protectively cradling her baby bump. "Mark, tell them it's a mistake," but Mark couldn't speak. A roaring sound filled his ears. The whispers of doubt, the sleep singing, the saffron, the vindaloo, it all came crashing down on him in a tidal wave of sickening realization. He hadn't been paranoid. He had been a fool, a laughing, oblivious fool. The humiliation was a physical force pressing down on him, crushing the air from his lungs. He felt the eyes of the audience, the crew, the millions of people watching at home, all boring into him. They were pitying him. They were laughing at him. The cuckolded husband, the last one to know. He lurched to his feet, knocking over a glass of water on the small table beside the sofa. I have to go," he choked out, his voice hoarse. "Mark, wait," Isabella cried, reaching for him, her face a mess of tears and confusion. He flinched away from her touch as if it were fire. He couldn't look at her. All he could see was a stranger, a liar. He stumbled off the stage, pushing past a bewildered-looking Janice Riley, and fled through a side exit, the sound of Isabella's desperate sobs and Derek Vance's frantic attempts to cut to a commercial break echoing behind him. He burst out into the cool night air of a back alley, the stench of garbage and stale city air filling his lungs. He leaned against a brick wall, gasping for breath, as the perfect gilded life he had so carefully constructed shattered into irreparable pieces around him. The laughter had finally stopped, and in its place was a silence more terrifying than any scream. The days that followed the on-air implosion were not just a landscape of hell. They were a meticulously architected torture chamber designed for an audience of one. Mark's phone, a device once synonymous with power and connection, became an instrument of torment. He didn't turn it off. In some masochistic ritual, he would watch the screen light up, the caller ID flashing names of people he'd once considered friends, now likely calling out of morbid curiosity. He'd read the previews of texts on his lock screen, each message a tiny, sharp stab. Mark. OMG, I'm so sorry, call me. Dude, is it true, WTF? Mark. This is Jessica from the Daily Mail. He imagined them huddled with their partners, wine in hand, dissecting his life like a soap opera plot twist. Can you believe it? Right there on live TV. He had fled to the Lexicon, a corporate soulless hotel in Midtown, a place so devoid of character it felt like a waiting room for the afterlife. He paid in cash using the name Michael Brown and retreated to room 14 Rue 8. For 72 hours, the world outside his window ceased to exist. He kept the blackout curtains drawn so tightly that not a sliver of daylight could penetrate the gloom, creating a timeless void where his agony could fester without interruption. He didn't shower. He didn't eat. He ordered a bottle of exorbitantly priced scotch from room service, and it sat on the desk untouched, a silent testament to the fact that even oblivion felt like too much effort. His mind was a battlefield. One moment, he was consumed by a rage so pure and white-hot it made his skin feel tight. He would pace the length of the small room, his fists clenched so hard his knuckles were white, his jaw aching. He pictured Isabella's face, not as the shocked victim on the stage, but as a master manipulator. He replayed their entire relationship in his head, but now the film was warped, discolored. Their first meeting at the gallery, was she scoping him out? Even then, their wedding vows, a string of beautiful, hollow lies. He remembered a conversation from months ago when they'd decided to start a family. He'd expressed a flicker of anxiety about fatherhood. She had cupped his face in her hands, looked him directly in the eye, and said, "You will be the most amazing father. Our baby will be so lucky to have you." The memory, once a source of comfort, now felt like the most profound and cruel deception. He wanted to smash the lamp, to punch the wall, to scream until his throat was raw. Who was he? Who was the man she had been with? The questions were a swarm of angry hornets in his skull, and each sting was a fresh wave of humiliation. Then just as suddenly the rage would recede, leaving behind a vast glacial numbness. He would sit on the edge of the bed, the mattress sagging under his weight, and stare at the generic, swirling pattern of the brown carpet for hours. In these moments he felt nothing at all. He was a shell, a hollowed-out man, whose life had been a sham. He'd see his own stunned face from the TV screen reflected in the dark glass of the television, a ghost haunting its own ruin. He had become a national punchline. The high-powered architect, the man who designed buildings to withstand earthquakes, couldn't even see that the foundation of his own home was built on sand. The irony was so crushingly perfect, it was almost elegant. On the third day, the silence was broken by a sharp rap on the door. Mark ignored it. Another rap, more insistent this time. "Mark, I know you're in there. Open the door. It's David." Mark remained motionless. He heard the slide of a keycard, a soft click, and the door swung open. David stood silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway, his face a mixture of concern and exasperation. He took in the scene, the darkness, the stale air, the disheveled wreck of a man on the bed, and swore softly under his breath. Jesus, Mark, he said, stepping inside and letting the door close behind him. You look like you've been on a 3-day bender with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. He flicked on a light, and Mark flinched, shielding his eyes. Turn it off. Mark rasped, his voice gravelly from disuse. David ignored him, his eyes scanning the room. I talked to Chloe. She went to see Isabella yesterday, at her parents' place in Connecticut. I don't want to hear it, Mark said, turning his face to the wall. I don't want to hear her name. You need to hear it, David insisted, pulling the desk chair over and sitting down, his knees almost touching Mark's. She's not doing well, man. She's broken. According to Chloe, she just sits there staring into space. She's not eating. She's barely sleeping. She just keeps saying the same thing over and over again. I don't understand. I don't understand. Good, Mark spat. Now she knows how I feel. No, you're not listening, David said, his voice firm. This isn't the act of a woman who got caught. Chloe's known her for 10 years. She said she's never seen anything like it. It's not guilt, Mark. It's pure, terrifying confusion. She swears she has no idea how this could have happened. She's just as lost as you are. Oh, so what's the story? A convenient bout of amnesia? The sarcastic words tasted like ash in his mouth. She just tripped and fell on some guy's dick and forgot about it. Stop it! David's voice was sharp, cutting through Mark's cynical haze. You know her better than that. Has she ever, in all the years you've known her, been a liar? Has she ever been deceitful? Mark fell silent. He wanted to say yes, to paint her as a villain, but he couldn't. Isabella's defining characteristic had always been her earnestness, her almost naive sincerity. She was the kind of person who would agonize for days over telling a small, white lie. She wants to figure this out. David continued, his tone softening. She wants to go back to the lab, get more tests done. She asked Chloe if you would be willing to meet with her parents and a lawyer, not to fight, but to find answers, together. The idea was repulsive, a summit of the wronged and the wrongdoer. But David's words, combined with the haunting image of Isabella's shocked face on that stage, had planted a tiny, reluctant seed of doubt in the barren soil of his anger. What if? What if it wasn't that simple? A week later, he found himself pulling his Mercedes into the underground garage of a skyscraper in the financial district. He was wearing the same suit he'd worn to the TV studio, the only one he had at the hotel. It felt like a costume for a role he no longer wanted to play. The law firm of Ashton Cole and Swain was on the 54th floor. The irony that he was meeting his wife's family at an office partially owned by her father was not lost on him. The conference room was all gleaming mahogany and supple leather, with a panoramic view of the harbor that felt like a mockery of his own claustrophobic existence. Isabella's parents, William and Eleanor Ashton, were already seated. William was a retired judge, a man whose face seemed carved from granite, his posture ramrod straight. Eleanor was elegant and poised, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a leather portfolio. Their lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Arthur Swain, stood to greet him with a professionally sympathetic smile. "Mark, thank you for coming." William began, his voice the deep, measured baritone of a man used to commanding a courtroom. "I know this is incredibly difficult. I want you to know first and foremost that we are not here to make excuses for our daughter. We are here to find the truth." Mark said nothing, just gave a curt nod. "Isabella is unwell." Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. "She is fragile, confused, and deeply, deeply distressed. We have had her under a doctor's care. He has had her go over every single day of the last year trying to find any gap, any anomaly, and she keeps coming back to one thing. William slid a thin file across the polished table. Her consulting trip to Chicago. The Art Innovate Fair. March 12th to the 16th. I know about the trip, Mark said, his voice flat and cold. He wasn't going to make this easy for them. He braced himself for a story, a concocted narrative designed to absolve their daughter. She was there for 5 days. William continued, ignoring Mark's tone. She remembers the first 2 days clearly. Meetings, seminars, networking lunches. She called you both nights, but on the third night, Wednesday, March 14th, she attended a large networking dinner, hosted by a gallery consortium. She remembers being seated at a table with several other consultants. She remembers having 2 glasses of wine over a 2-hour period. And then it goes blank. Mark felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones, a dread that was different from the hot burn of betrayal. Her next memory, Eleanor picked up, her voice trembling, is waking up in her hotel room bed the next morning. It was after 10 a.m. She'd slept through her alarm. Her head was pounding, she was nauseous, and she felt foggy, disoriented. She was still in her dress from the night before. She assumed she had simply had too much to drink, that she'd embarrassed herself by getting drunk and had come back to her room and passed out. She felt ashamed, but she dismissed it. She never mentioned it to you because she was mortified. The room was silent. Mark stared at the file on the table, his heart hammering in his chest. "Are you telling me," he said slowly, the words feeling alien in his mouth, "that you think she was drugged? We don't want to jump to conclusions." Arthur Swain, the lawyer, interjected smoothly, "But it is a significant and troubling gap in her memory during the likely window of conception. With Isabella's full consent, we engaged a private investigator in Chicago. The report came in this morning." He opened the portfolio Eleanor had been clutching and took out a stapled document. The investigator, a very thorough man, managed to track down 3 other people who were at that dinner. 2 of them remembered seeing Isabella in a deep conversation with a man named Julian Varja. The name meant nothing to Mark. Varja is a prominent art dealer, William explained, specializes in Middle Eastern and South Asian artifacts. Very charismatic, very successful. They remembered Isabella leaving the restaurant with him around 11 p.m. One of them, a woman, noted that Isabella seemed unsteady on her feet, far more than 2 glasses of wine would warrant. She said Varja had his arm around her, steering her was the phrase she used. The investigator had dug into Julian Varja's background. On the surface, he was impeccable. But dig a little deeper, and there were whispers, rumors from younger women in the art world, stories of his overbearing charm turning sinister after a few drinks, of uncomfortable situations that were never reported, brushed aside as misinterpretations. Varja had a pattern. He was also, the report noted, currently on a 6-month sourcing expedition in the remote regions of India and Pakistan. Conveniently unreachable. But it was the final page of the report that made the air leave Mark's lungs in a rush. The investigator had obtained a copy of the menu from the restaurant that night, a high-end Persian place called Cyrus's Table. He had highlighted several items. One of the house specialties was koreshte fesenjan, a rich chicken and walnut stew. Another was a signature lamb kebab, marinated in yogurt and saffron. Sourced, the menu boasted directly from the fields around Mashhad, Iran. Suddenly, the last few months of his life rearranged themselves into a new, horrifying mosaic. The saffron. The sleep singing, was it a Farsi lullaby? the desperate, insatiable craving for lamb vindaloo from that one specific restaurant on Lexington Avenue. He'd looked it up since the meeting was arranged. The owner, Mr. Khan, was from Mumbai, but his wife, the chef, was from a family of restaurateurs who had moved from Tehran to Mumbai after the revolution. Her cooking was a fusion of Persian and Indian flavors. These weren't Isabella's cravings. They weren't her memories. They were echoes, faint, ghostly transmissions from another man's life, another man's culture, passed into her system along with his DNA. Mark went home to the hotel, his new pathetic home, and fell into a frantic, obsessive spiral of online research. He typed pregnancy cravings and paternal DNA and fetal memory into the search bar. He found articles on fetal microchimerism, the phenomenon where a small number of fetal cells circulate in the mother's body for years. But this was something more. He found speculative papers, forum posts from women who swore they craved their husband's favorite childhood candy or suddenly loved a type of music their husband adored. But nothing like this. Nothing this specific, this invasive. It was as if the child conceived in violence and violation was screaming its origins into its mother's very being. The truth was 1,000 times worse than infidelity. Isabella hadn't betrayed him. She had been erased, violated in a way that left no bruises, only these strange phantom imprints on her soul. The father of her child wasn't a rival. He was a monster. The rage was gone now, scoured away by a tide of sorrow and a horror so profound it left him shaking. He felt sorrow for Isabella, for the piece of her life that had been stolen and desecrated, and sorrow for the baby, this innocent, blameless child, a living, breathing secret that had torn their world apart before it had even taken its first breath. He had to see her. The drive to Connecticut was a blur. The manicured suburbs of Greenwich, once a symbol of their shared future, now seemed like a foreign country. He found her in the Ashtons' sprawling, immaculate garden. She was sitting on a cold stone bench, staring at a dormant rose bush. She was a pale, fragile shadow of the woman he had married, her vibrant energy extinguished. She looked up as he approached, and her eyes, the same eyes he had once seen as full of love, then deceit, then shock, were now filled with a fear and a bottomless shame that mirrored his own. He sat down beside her, the silence between them heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. The scandal, the cameras, the lawyers, the monster named Julian Vaha. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered finally, her voice so brittle it sounded like it might shatter. "For all of it, I'm so sorry." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the woman from the tabloids, but the victim at the heart of an unspeakable tragedy. Their perfect life was a ruin, their marriage a casualty. The future he had designed with such meticulous care was gone, replaced by a fog of impossible questions. How could he look at this child and not see the man who created him? How could she? But as he sat there in the cold afternoon light, he realized that underneath all the wreckage, something new and unwanted had been forged, a shared trauma, a common enemy. And at the center of it all, the innocent child that tied them together in a way that vows and rings never could. A child who would need a protector, a child who would need a father regardless of the blood in its veins. "It wasn't your fault, Izzy," he said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate, yet utterly necessary. He reached across the space between them, his hand trembling slightly, and took hers. Her fingers were ice cold. It was a gesture that fixed nothing. It didn't erase the pain or the public humiliation or the dark, complicated road that lay ahead. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something much more primal. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition that they were the only two people on Earth who could truly understand the depths of this disaster. It was the first tentative step out of the rubble into a new reality where the bitter taste of truth was the only thing left to share. The story of Mark and Isabella isn't just about a DNA test. It's a chilling reminder that the lives we build can be shattered by secrets we don't even know exist. Their journey through public humiliation led them to a truth far darker and more complex than simple betrayal. It forced them to question the very nature of memory, identity, and family. What happens after the cameras stop rolling? How do you rebuild a life from the ashes of such a devastating revelation? Their story is far from over. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the hidden complexities of life and relationships, then please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story that goes beyond the headlines. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas that explore the raw, unfiltered, and often shocking realities of the human experience. Don't miss what we uncover next.